Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our workshops. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank y'all for being here. My name is Anna. I'm the Innovation and Event Specialist here at WERXShops, and we are so happy to have you. And today we have with us Major Scott Doler. He is with the LeMay Center, and then we have Major Justin Cunningham with Space Force, and they are just going to be sharing a little bit about Doctrine, how it works within Air Force and Space Force, and also the importance of innovating Doctrine and kind of keeping up with the changing times that we are in. So I'm going to turn it over to them, but thank y'all so much. And please, I'll be monitoring the chat. We're also live on YouTube. So YouTube folks, you can like and subscribe. You can email us at info@mgmworks.org if you have any questions. And I'm gonna monitor the chat, but we will have we'll open for questions and answers at the end. So thank y'all so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So my name is Major Scott Doler. I'm with the LeMay Center for Doctrine Development and Education. I'm actually in the Air Force Service Doctrine Directorate with our division. So one of the things I want to talk to you guys today about is a little bit about Air Force doctrine and how, when we start thinking of different ideas about how we accelerate, change, or lose, or get after General Brown, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force's vision of modernizing the Air Force, how do we take a lot of the good ideas that we have, the good concepts, all those different types of things that we can make ourselves a lot more lethal and modernize the force, and how do we actually take those and we start building them into something that can be either incorporated into Air Force doctrine or even create a brand new doctrine note. So we start thinking about how we improve efficiency. We have a couple different courses of action, sometimes as we like to call them, or concepts that have been developed. Some particular ones have been joint all-domain operations. That started out as a great idea of capturing how exactly we provide effects through multiple different domains and actually are able to use those on the operational environment, how to actually capture those different things that we do and be able to write it down for what exactly are our best practices. We also had a doctrine note that came out as far as agile combat employment, looking at how do we actually employ our forces in an agile way, if we're looking at a Indo-Pacific fight, and start to figure out what exactly are our best practices for that. We created a doctrine note for it. And now we're also starting to look at mission command. How exactly do we incorporate mission command into our doctrine, and what are kind of the best practices for that? So right now we actually have mission command that is in the draft phase for a doctrine note. So I just want to kind of show you what exactly that process is for how these great ideas come about and then get incorporated into the best practices. So when we start thinking about this, we really have to look at the different new ways that we are innovating and that we are conducting warfare. And we really have to take a look at how those new ways that we do warfare actually kind of put a new lens on a lot of our best practices that we have. And of course, we capture all those best practices with doctrine. So I'm going to go over how exactly an idea becomes Air Force doctrine. So to start off with, I want to talk real quick about a quote from General LeMay. So at the very heart of warfare lies doctrine, represents some central beliefs for waging war to achieve victory. Now, this is kind of important because when we start thinking about doctrine, we really have to realize that this is our central beliefs when we start thinking about what we currently know that we have to do in order to actually achieve victory. So, and it's all related back to warfare. So this is all about the entire campaign. It's not necessarily just winning a battle. And then doctrine is of the mind. So you're talking about basically having faith and the knowledge that is reinforced by experience. So we're taking the lessons that we've learned from the past and we're being able to apply them towards how we organize our forces and employ them to fight. And one of the big things we also have to realize that it is the building material for strategy. So when we start to think about the best ways how we organize our forces and put them together in order to go out and conduct operations, really the best way that we can do that is going to impact how our strategy is going to be formed for the future. Now, when you start talking about doctrine, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to put your finger on what exactly is doctrine. Well, doctrine is all about how you organize and employ your forces. So when we start talking about Air Force doctrine, really what we're talking about is how do we organize our Air Force forces to present them to a Joint Force commander, and how do we actually command and control those forces in order to employ them. So when we present forces as an air component, we present them within our Air Expeditionary Task Forces, and we control them with the Air Operations Center. Now, when we organize our forces like that, we also have to be able to figure out the best ways to have them go out and do operations. So we have doctrine publications for not only how we organize our forces, like the command and control, which outlines the Air Expeditionary Task Forces and the Air Operations Center, like AFDP 3-30. We also have to figure out how we're going to take those forces and actually use some of our best practices that we've developed and capture those in some of our publications, like the Counter Land publication or the Counter Air publication as well. So these are agreed upon best practices and principles that we have as the Air Force. We put these together and we say, hey, here's our playbook. This is how we're going to go out and we're going to accomplish our operations. Now, this is important because not only do Air Force people read Air Force doctrine, but also Army people, Navy people, Marine Corps, and Space Force members end up reading Air Force doctrine as well, because they need to figure out how exactly they end up fitting into that picture as well when the Air Force comes to fight. So when we look at our doctrine, really, it is supported by history. So we take a look at the different lessons that have been learned. Typically, this is, blood spilled in battle. We look at the history of what worked and what didn't. We capture those ways that we've fought, and we've actually written them down as far as here are the best practices that have worked in the past. Also, they may be captured via debate or analysis. So we take a look at maybe some of the after action reports, find out what exactly worked, what didn't, why didn't it work, and then figure out how to actually incorporate that into doctrine as far as the best practices as well. The other part is kind of important when you start talking about exercises and war games. So in the absence of combat, particularly when you start talking about the transition and the pivot point that we're kind of getting into right now, you have to be able to take a look at doctrine. How do we organize our forces as well as conduct our operations in a different theater where we don't necessarily have the ability to test our doctrine at scale. Well, exercises and war games are very, very great at that because it allows us to go through our doctrine more or less at scale and make sure that we're actually able to figure out what the best practices are. And then we're able to take a look at the different concepts that are being presented. For example, joint all domain operations, agile combat employment, mission command, and we're able to kind of poke holes in those through wargaming and through exercises and find out what exactly works and what doesn't, and be able to get kind of the best practices out of it. The other thing that we have to understand when we start talking about doctrine is it is official advice. So it is authoritative, but it is not directive. So this means that for the most part, follow doctrine. If there are circumstances which require you to deviate from doctrine, it is okay. However, you have to at least be able to justify, why exactly was it that you departed from doctrine, because it may end up having unintended ripple effects across the joint force that's being employed. So we start talking about the actual scope of doctrine. Really, what is doctrine all about? Well, doctrine is about war fighting. It's not necessarily about physics. We're talking about what exactly are the forces and how they actually interact with each other. So say, for example, if you're having a land component and an air component that are operating in the exact same spot, you're talking about how those two different components fit together and operate together instead of necessarily, which bomb to drop on which target. It's also focused on effects. So we're looking at what exactly is the best way to get after the Joint Force Commander's end state. So a lot of what we're talking about is the different capabilities that we bring to fight that can provide those effects, not necessarily the weapon systems that can provide it. We also talk about using domains, not necessarily owning domains. We talk about how to organize our forces that we bring to the fight. We're not necessarily talking about the different organizations within a service. Next, we talk about synergy and not necessarily segregation. We're really talking about the actual way that you put the pieces of the puzzle of the force together, not necessarily how one Air Operations Center does a particular task. We're looking for something where it's going to be able to be applied across the entire Air Force as a service. And integration, not just synchronization. What I mean by this is when we start talking about doctrine, we really have to place an emphasis on what exactly are the planning considerations that it takes in order to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So it's great if we're synchronized, right? And we can have two different organizations doing the exact same thing at the same time, but we're truly integrated if we're able to begin that at the onset of planning and really be able to kind of stitch those pieces together. And the next piece is the right force, not necessarily equal shares of the force. When we're talking about doctrine, we're talking about what is the best way for us to actually organize our forces so we get the biggest bang for the buck. It's not necessarily the ammo to end up giving people the manpower argument that they're looking for. We're talking about what exactly is the actual right complement of the force. So how exactly do we go from concepts to doctrine? So as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of people trying to get after, what is the best way for us to either operate, whether it's using JADO, you're looking at the different, effects that are happening across multiple different domains. How do you actually command and control it? You're looking at all those different things with ACE. How exactly does that get into to best practices? Well, there's a couple different things when you start thinking about what exactly is a concept and what exactly is doctrine. Well, concepts are going to be used to develop capabilities to meet national strategic goals. So here the key word is development. Concepts are those things that we are currently developing in order to meet those needs. Also, they're unproven ideas that should be rigorously tested. So these ideas, if they have not survived wargaming exercises or combat, they're not necessarily something that is doctrine. It's also a notion or a statement that expresses how something might be done. So think of this as a course of action. And then it's also developed in response to a range of future challenges. So doctrine, by and large, is all reinforced by past lessons learned and what has worked in the past. And then concepts should propose a clear alternative to existing doctrine. A lot of times when we start thinking about the different concepts that are being proposed, we start thinking that, well, this is just kind of a different way of doing something. But as we later examine them, we start to realize that, these concepts really aren't necessarily different from doctrine. They still align with our different, core principles and kind of align. But, really, if it's a concept that's going to be developed and put into a doctrine note, it needs to be something that kind of exists outside of doctrine. When we start talking about doctrine is really based upon the capabilities that we have for force employment. So the capabilities that we have right now. They also describe the operations that are done with our existing capabilities. And the other thing is they're subject to policy, treaty, and legal constraints. So doctrine does not reiterate policy, right? Policy is all those things that you are required or you must do by, the higher headquarters, the people that own the Air Force, or that the things that the Air Force say that you must do. So doctrine is not a way to get around policy. And also we don't necessarily need to restate policy in our doctrine. So with this here, I actually want to give a really good concept that became doctrine. And this actually came out of U.S. Army Field Regulation 1861. All right, so 1861, we're looking at pretty much beginning or very beginning of Civil War. So the field regulation states, coffee tastes better if latrines are dug downstream from the encampment. All right. That sounds like a pretty novel concept, right? You dig the latrines downstream from the encampment, coffee tastes better. Well, what happens if the coffee tastes better? Well, you have higher morale, right? It's going to improve your warfighting capability. So really, when you start talking about doctrine, that's existing capabilities that we have for force employment, right? If you do this, you'll actually end up having higher morale and a better fighting force. It also describes the actual operations that are conducted, right, with the existing capabilities. All you have to do is dig your latrine downstream, and it's better. And it's also subject to policy, treaty, and everything else. Now let's take that exact same model of, you have to dig your latrines downstream in order to have good tasting coffee. Think about that in the concept of agile combat employment. Are there other different considerations? Start thinking about what are the negative effects of the partner nation that's actually hosting our forces that are maybe island hopping during agile combat employment. What are those sort of things? Those are the sort of concepts that we need to end up being able to go through war game exercise, being able to figure out what the actual best practices are that are going to be able to make it into doctrine. So let's take our notional ACE concept, and we'll start putting it into how you actually end up creating a doctrine note. So in order to create a doctrine note, it has to be true across the U.S. Air Force, because that's how doctrine works. It's not necessarily tailored just for one specific AETF, or one specific Air Operations Center. So yep, it checks the box for being true across the Air Force. It also does kind of nest within some of the existing doctrine, and then it's also derived from existing proven concepts. So we take a look at it, we think, all right, well, this is going to be something that's good to be included in the ACE doctrine note. Boom. All right, we go ahead and put it in there. Now there's a new concept that's developed. We start looking at, oh, wow, we don't actually have doctrine for this, or the best practices put together that we can actually go off of. Well, we start to look at, okay, well, I'm going to submit this, this concept to get created into doctrine. Well, I have to end up going out and actually getting that endorsed. And the actual endorsement process for that is outlined in Air Force Instruction 10-1301, Air Force Doctrine Development. So you guys can look this up on EPUBs if you would like. So 10-1301. In order to end up getting your get endorsement, typically it's going to be spurred by a general officer recommendation, and that'll get sent up to the LeMay Center for us to have to take a look at it. And sometimes it can actually be directed upwards from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force down for us to start developing the doctrine. So once the concept is proposed, Air Force Doctrine Development drafts it, it takes a look at it, and it starts developing a draft doctrine note. We start looking at the proposed concept. Does it fit into different pieces of doctrine? Is it something that has to be standalone and brand new? And we figure it's going to be something that is standalone and actually has to be a doctrine note. That's when we start drafting it, we build it up, and then we send it over and start to, send it through the LeMay Center to get it refined. So we have some people from Lessons Learned take a look at it. We have some people from Wargaming look at it, and really kind of get a good product together where we're going to be able to actually make some progress to get additional contributions done. Next, we actually distribute it out to the doctrine points of contact within most of the major commands and headquarters Air Force as well. And we start to look at who exactly are the subject matter experts that are going to be able to contribute the most to this doctrine note. And we actually hold a writing committee. Now in this writing committee, people are going to be brought in, everybody all within one room, so they can take a look at the proposed doctrine note. They can add their comments and really kind of put a really good doctrine note together so that it encompasses everything we want to talk about. After that writing committee is done, then we end up sending out that doctrine note via the standard review process. And that standard review process basically gets coordinated out through all of the major commands, all of the headquarters staff agencies, and makes its way down so that anybody in the Air Force can put together a comment resolution matrix and add their inputs into that doctrine note, and really make sure that it's something that everybody has contributed to, as well as it works for the entire Air Force. So I went over a little bit about what exactly is the difference between concepts and doctrine, and how with a lot of our innovation that's going on in the Air Force with the accelerate, change, or lose is kind of spurring a lot of really good ideas that are going around, and how your ideas can be submitted up to more or less develop doctrine and figure out how exactly we can better understand and distribute our best practices. So if anybody would like to have any questions, comments, or anything else that you'd like to talk about, definitely feel free to give me a phone call or an email as far as Air Force Doctrine. So at Air Force Service Doctrine, we are definitely more than welcome to field all of the phone calls or doctrine-related questions that you guys would like to have. I would like to open it up right now. Would anybody have any questions as far as the material I just talked about?
Hey, Scott, I think we have a question in the room here locally at MGM Works. Dave Maida, if you'd be interested to ask your question.
Yeah, hey, this is Dave Maida. I'm a Education with Industry Fellow, Active Duty Air Force. My question is a real, I guess, softball question for you. Just curious, how often is doctrine actually updated? Is it on a cycle, or is it just on a kind of an as-needed situation?
All right, so great question. So actually outlined in our Air Force instruction, so we are required to update doctrine publications on a 2-year cycle. Should, I think, is the key word. So as we start to go through and we update our doctrine, the process can be very long. There are a lot of different people who end up having contributions to the doctrine publications as we go through, but is a revised on a 2-year cycle, if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So, Scott, another question that I have as we start working through the processes and verifying. My name is Justin Cunningham. I'm the USSF liaison to LeMay. But as we go through this and we work through the concepts of operational concept, your typical doctrine note development is identify the process from point A to point B. So if I happen to have an operational concept and I am an operator downrange that I believe needs to get into doctrine, what steps do I need to take in order to initiate that function? And should I reach out to the Air Force Doctrine webpage for that beforehand, or is it something that I can reach out to like leadership in my own function? What's the steps I need to take if I want to take an operational concept to bring that to to get reviewed by the big brains and the individuals that are at the LeMay Center?
All right, so great question. Thank you very much. So when we start talking about how exactly you take a concept, you definitely want to take a look first at the doctrine.af.mil website. So if you take a look at that website, you'll see all the current doctrine publications that are out there right now. Oftentimes, a lot of the concepts that are being developed might end up being covered in some of those, or might even be good being added into those. Really, the best way to start approaching this is talking through your chain of command. So every single major command and headquarters staff has a doctrine point of contact. So if anybody would need those doctrine points of contact or would like to chat with your doctrine point of contact, definitely just send me an email and I'll be able to send you who the name of your doctrine point of contact is. But as you start going through, the biggest thing to actually get it submitted is to get general officer approval for a new doctrine note. If you're looking at it, being something completely new and departing from all current doctrine that's out there. So routing it through your chain of command, getting the buy-on and support, and then also making sure that, it's not something that is just local to your organization, but it is something that can actually be used and is a best practice for the entire Air Force. Does that answer your question?
It does help me on that end, friend. But I would say if there's, we might want to take one or two more questions from the audience. So in this case, I know that an old friend of mine is online as well. Do you have any impending knowledge questions, Mr. Butler? Oh, let me read here. It says, with the push for innovation happening throughout all the ranks of both the air and space forces, how do we start educating our airmen at the lowest level to start understanding and improving doctrine? Let me repeat that again. With the push for innovation happening throughout all the ranks of both the air and space forces, how do we start educating our airmen at the lowest level to start understanding and improving doctrine? Now, if you want, Scott, you can take the Air Force side and I'll take the Space Force side. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
All right, sounds great. So I can handle this real quick first. So when we start talking about how exactly do you end up, helping airmen at the lowest levels with being able to understand and improve doctrine, I think part of that is getting him interested in doctrine to kind of begin with. When you start, nobody likes to really go out and read doctrine. Of course, some people, it's your job. You have to go out and read it. You have to figure out how our organization is formed and organized, and how you actually kind of put those pieces together. But, our outreach division at the LeMay Center has actually put together some really good podcasts when we start talking about, what's going on in doctrine right now, and being able to get that. I'll have to get the link of where the podcasts and everything are located, but you can actually find that link off of the doctrine.af.mil website. But that's kind of a good place to kind of at least point people in the right direction to see, what exactly is the forefront of doctrine, and, how our senior leaders are approaching the different concepts that they want to actually have us go out and employ, and kind of what the doctrinal perspective is on that. If you have free time, you could definitely go out and download some of our Air Force doctrine pubs off the doctrine.af.mil website. Believe we actually do have a couple of those that are audio as well. So if you're, say for example, driving in the car and want to listen to some doctrine and hear, what exactly is, our capstone, Air Force Doctrine Publication 1 doctrine. You can basically go onto the doctrine.af.mil website, click on the audio version and listen to it. So, all right, over to you.
I absolutely agree with everything you said, friend. The outreach section associated with LeMay Center for Air Force Doctrine is done paramount when it relates to documentation, podcasts, videos, visualizations and updates, outreach communication, events like this where WERXShops allowed us to come and sit in their spaces and communicate this capability for all you fine folks. I think one of the iterations that we're getting into from a space power perspective is figuring out how to actually individuals want to get into the play, how they want to care to bring part of this into their common working force. So your young airmen, your young guardians who are in the position that they want to connect to and understand doctrine. It's emphasizing it in the sense of, and I might be stealing your words here, ma'am, the concept of actually having that box that people can understand what the baseline is to think outside of. So in that concept, what we're looking at is identifying to our airmen that, hey, these are things that exist. People have come up with answers to 80% of the question you're going to have for your operational involvement. Maybe that 20% is what you do from your, I won't say for lack of a better term, flair, but what connection you want to make based on the entity that you have and your mission set. So the 80% solution is here with a bit of the, how did you say it, Dave? Flexibility and versatility based on how doctrine is written. So in the end, to get individuals to care and want to read, to understand and have a baseline knowledge is all predicated on the communication and proliferation that they're trying to do within the Air Force LeMay Center. They, again, have great products to bring forward. And then subsequently, I will say that Delta 10, who is the Space Force Doctrine Center of Excellence that does both doctrine development, evaluation, and wargaming, they actually have a link for you via that doctrine.af.mil section. If you scroll to the bottom, you click there, you'll see the Space Force doctrine that we have currently developed. They're doing the same entities, providing both communication points, outreach, as well as material you can hold. I happen to have a small little beat up doctrine for space capstone publication sitting in front of me now. The intention is to allow individuals the freedom to get to it and make it more accessible over the period of time while they're in the environments that would necessitate that information. So before you mentioned the implementation of the C2 elements at the AOC. Well, there is information that can tell you basically how to do your job at the operational level when you can decompose that into something for a tactical implementation. So it gives you that overarching information. And if you want the answers to the test, maybe read the doctrine first. That'll help you get the understanding of where you need to be next. Does that answer yourself? Oh, we've got another one here. Actually, going back. So, Mr. Butler, does that get? Oh, that's perfect. Perfect. I appreciate you, friend. Let's see. So, MGM works. Is it more common for doctrine to start with a problem that needs to be solved, or is it more common to start with a solution that can be implemented? Ooh, that's a good one. You or me first, Scott?
All right. So I would definitely say that from a doctrine perspective, it is a common solution that can be implemented. So when you start talking about, when you start looking at a problem that can be solved, that is something that's kind of in the future. You don't necessarily know if it's going to be solved, universally the exact same way across the force. So when you start talking about, a concept of, hey, this works great for me, but then you start looking over to your left and to your right, it's like, hey, well, does doing this process actually work the best for you too as well? As soon as they start saying, yeah, actually that works for me. Yep. Okay. All right. So maybe there's a common thread here, and it could be a best practice. And then you start, looking at how exactly is it implemented. So when you start looking at doctrine, you're looking at, what is historically the best practice. So whether that be historically done on the battlefield or whether that historically be done in exercises and war games. So it definitely, concepts start with the problem, but then doctrine is that latter half where it's you figured out how to solve the problem and you're communicating to everybody that this is the best practice and best way to solve it. Any questions? Okay. Any other questions out there? Justin, would you like to chime in?
Well, friend, I don't necessarily, sorry, I was technically looking on my side. No, your last two sentences in relation to that, identifying the pathway that you outlined from concept to doctrine was on point, friend. There's been conversations back and forth related to future doctrine or emerging concepts or emerging doctrine. And that's kind of a misnomer. The operational concept is something that comes into place that we're seeing that is an issue that needs to be communicated and worked through. And you go through that, identifying it as something that happens in operations. And then to your point, comes out of wargaming. And then subsequently, once the war game gets through enough iterations of it and you see it enough in operations, then to your point again, friend, it comes into the implementation for and through a doctrine development and a writing group based on all the powers that be in this case. Unfortunately, we from a Space Force perspective, I won't say unfortunately, that's a wrong way to start that. We're in a position where, having separated as the service, there are operational elements that we're bringing into doctrine that have existed during our time frame underneath the Air Force. And there are things that we're having to build on our own. And again, the fine people at Delta 10 are doing a great job with identifying, decentralizing, and actually synergizing the things that we've talked about before. So one thing that Major Dolar is working through at this point in time is concepts for connecting through a different series of operational systems beyond just the system we're working on now, which I won't speak for him on that one, but there are different capabilities in which we're trying to make doctrine a little more easy to get into. There are systems that exist today via the joint joint community that we're looking at. There are new systems that other organizations are trying to bring to make Doctrine more easy to get to. But in the end state, we want to make sure that Doctrine is that pure, unauthoritative best practice, not something that we can put in like, hey, this is what my operation does. We should put it into Doctrine, so everybody has to do it. That's not where we sit. Is that fair to say, friend?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as far as the part that you referenced with the new ways of accessing Doctrine, I can't really speak as much on it right now since we have a vendor that's kind of putting some stuff together, but hopefully soon in the future, within the next couple of years, Doctrine will be very easily, readily compiled, collaborated, searchable, and everything else. So stand by for great things to happen on that.
Well, thank you both so much, Majors Cunningham and Dollar both. Thank you for just coming today, taking the time, sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And Doctrine really is an important subject that I think is often overlooked. So I appreciate y'all coming. And to that point, the LeMay Center is working with us here at MGM Works to put on a doctrinal innovation essay challenge. So anyone who's interested, please submit your ideas, submit your thoughts. The general prompt is how operational doctrine needs to change, adapt, adopt, update due to the changing character of war that's expected over the next 10 years. So it's a really cool opportunity. There are going to be some really great prizes for the folks who submit and win. Your paper could be published. And we have some other things too. So y'all consider it. Head to mgmworks.org for more info. And if y'all are interested in the workshops like this that we do in the future, mgmworks.org has all of the information. You can subscribe to our newsletter where you'll find out about future opportunities like this. And for the YouTube folks that couldn't ask questions in the chat, thank y'all for being here. Please feel free to email info@mgmworks.org for more information, or Mr. Major Scott Dollar's email is here on the screen. So feel free to send any questions his way as well. And thank you guys for being here. This was recorded, so we will have the recording out later on this week for anyone who wants to go back and view it again. So thank you all so much for your time, and we hope you enjoyed our workshops today.